Welcome to another deep dive. I am incredibly excited about what we have on the table today because we're looking at something that fundamentally shapes the reality you live in, even if you can't physically see it.
Yeah, it is. It's a structural thing, right? A really hidden architecture.
Exactly. And to get us started, I want you to visualize something for me. Just picture a massive, towering glass funnel.
Okay, glass funnel.
Right. It is sitting right in front of you on a table. And at the very top of this funnel, you are going to pour in the absolute peak of the world's standard of living.
So like the highest possible average.
Yes, exactly. I mean, the total sum
Mhm.
of global human development, all the wealth, the years of life we have gained, the collective knowledge we have accumulated, right now on the global scoreboard, that number sits roughly 3/4 of the way to a perfect score.
Which is a historic high, by the way. For the statisticians out there, it is a 0.756 on a scale of 0 to 1. We have literally never, as a species, scored higher.
Right, so you pour that beautiful, record-breaking 0.756 liquid into the top of the funnel. But as it travels down, it has to pass through this dense, heavy filter lodged in the neck of the glass.
And that filter is human inequality.
Exactly. By the time the liquid actually drips out the bottom, representing the reality of what the average person actually experiences on this planet, a massive chunk of it is just gone. The score drops down to roughly 10.590.
It just evaporates into the walls of the funnel.
Yeah.
I mean, when you run the actual math on that drop, we are losing nearly 22% of all global human progress.
Wait, 22%?
Yeah, 21.96% to be exact.
Right.
Almost a quarter of our health, wealth, and education is essentially swallowed up by unequal distribution.
And that is the core mystery we're unpacking today. Because for 30 years, the story we have been told is a story of, well, unbroken, triumphant progress.
Right, the line always goes up.
And you turn on the news, you read the annual economic reports, and the line chart is always pointing to the sky. But the question is, are we actually doing better collectively? Or is that rising global average acting like a blinding light, hiding a massive systemic loss in the shadows?
The global average is a highly useful statistical tool, but you are entirely right to be skeptical of it. Averages can be incredibly deceptive.
Yeah, like the classic billionaire in a room analogy.
Precisely. If you and I are sitting in a room and a billionaire walks in, on average, everyone in that room is suddenly a multimillionaire. But your bank account has not actually changed one bit.
Right.
So today we have a mountain of comparative data spanning from 1990 all the way to 2023. We are going to be looking at multidimensional human development, life expectancy, carbon emissions, gender pay gaps, the whole spectrum.
But we aren't just going to hover at 30,000 feet and read global spreadsheets, right? So to make this real, to see how that funnel actually works on the ground, we're going to anchor all of this global data against a very specific, highly revealing case study.
The East African nation of Djibouti.
Exactly.
It is a brilliant comparison point. Djibouti is a nation that sits at one of the most vital geographic intersections of global trade, right on the Horn of Africa.
Yeah, billions of dollars of global wealth float past its shores every single day.
Right. And by looking at their internal numbers versus the global trajectory, we can really expose the mechanisms of that invisible ceiling you mentioned.
And as we navigate this, I want you, the listener, to keep a question running in the back of your mind. What does this look like in your own community?
That is a great lens to view this through.
Right, because when a new state-of-the-art tech campus opens downtown, or the local schools report higher standardized test scores, whose progress is actually being measured? And who is quietly paying the hidden tax for your community's average success?
To even begin answering that, though, we really need to take a step back. The source material we are diving into is incredibly dense.
Yeah, it is basically an alphabet soup of UN metrics.
Exactly. So we need to define the terminology so we can actually understand the story the numbers are trying to tell us.
Okay, so let's open up the toolkit. The granddaddy of all these metrics is the HDI, the Human Development Index.
Right.
When I first encountered the HDI, I thought of it like a country's ultimate GPA. If a nation is a student, the HDI is taking their grades in health, education, and wealth, and mashing them together into one clean score.
That is functionally how it works, yes. But the history of why we even have an HDI is crucial context here.
Okay, lay it on me.
Back in the 1980s and before, the global community basically judged a country's success on one single metric, which was GDP, gross domestic product.
So it was all about the money.
Exactly. The assumption was simply that if a country was getting richer, the people must be doing better.
Which seems logical on the surface, I mean,
Mm.
more money means you can buy more food, build more hospitals.
It does seem logical, but economists like Amartya Sen and Mahbubul Haq started looking around and realizing that was not always happening.
Really? How so?
Well, you had countries discovering massive oil reserves, right? Their GDP would skyrocket, but their infant mortality rates were still atrocious, and their kids still could not read.
Oh, wow. So the money wasn't reaching the ground.
Exactly. Wealth was just accumulating in the hands of a tiny elite or being hoarded by the state. So in 1990, they introduced the HDI to force the world to look beyond the wallet.
It was a way of saying, hey, money is only useful if it buys you a longer, smarter life.
Precisely. They defined development not as the accumulation of capital, but as the expansion of human capability, having the freedom and the tools to lead the kind of life you value.
So the HDI measures 3 dimensions: a long and healthy life, access to knowledge, and a decent standard of living.
Yeah.
But as our sources today make very clear, the basic HDI just is not enough anymore. It is like the center gear in a much larger machine. And spinning right next to it are 2 other gears, the GDI and the GII.
Right. The Gender Development Index and the Gender Inequality Index.
Walk me through the mechanics of those. Why do we need 2 separate gender metrics?
Well, the GDI essentially takes the HDI, that overall GPA of health, wealth, and knowledge, and calculates it separately for men and women.
Oh, so it splits the grade book.
Exactly. It asks, are women achieving the same basic development milestones as men?
Okay, and the GII.
The GII digs deeper into the systemic structural barriers. It looks at reproductive health, like maternal mortality. It looks at empowerment, like how many seats women hold in parliament.
I see.
And it looks at the labor market. It basically measures the loss of potential human development due to inequality between female and male achievements.
So the GDI shows us the gap in the outcome, and the GII shows us the systemic roadblocks causing the gap. That makes sense.
Yes, that is a perfect way to summarize it.
Okay, then we have the metric that actually creates that funnel effect we talked about at the top of the show, the IHDI.
The inequality-adjusted HDI. This is perhaps the most vital tool in modern economics.
Oh, why is it so vital?
Because the base HDI might look at a country and say, on average, your citizens live to be 75, they go to school for 12 years, and they make $30,000.
Right. Sounds pretty good.
But the IHDI looks at the actual distribution of those things. If one person lives to 100 and has 3 PhDs and $1 million, while 9 other people die at 40 with no education and no money, the average still looks okay.
Ah, so the IHDI penalizes a country's score
Yeah.
based on how unequal that distribution is.
Yes. It strips away the illusion of the average.
It is the mechanism that calls out the billionaire in the room.
Exactly.
And finally, we have the newest gear in this machine, which completely turns the traditional concept of progress on its head, the PHDI.
The planetary pressures adjusted HDI.
Right.
This is the environmental reckoning. It asks a very uncomfortable question of the wealthiest nations on Earth.
Which is?
How much carbon dioxide did you pump into the atmosphere, and how much of the Earth's crust did you have to dig up and consume to achieve your high standard of living?
Oof. So it is the bill coming due.
It really is.
Now, before we unleash all these indices on the historical data, I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Go for it.
We are talking about human lives, right?
Yeah.
We are talking about the grief of a family losing a mother in childbirth, the dignity of a person getting their first paycheck, the sheer joy of a child figuring out how to read a sentence.
Yes.
Doesn't it feel a bit, I don't know, reductive, like a bit clinical, to boil the messy, infinite complexity of a human life down to a decimal point?
It is a profoundly important critique. And you are right, no index can capture the soul of a society. A metric does not know what a mother's laugh sounds like.
Right.
But we have to look at the alternative. Without these standardized clinical measurements, how do we hold massive systems accountable?
That is true.
If we just rely on political rhetoric, every government will tell you they're doing a fantastic job. Every single leader will say their people are thriving.
And they will point to that one shiny new hospital in the capital as proof.
Yes. The anecdote becomes the shield. These metrics, as cold as they might seem, are the diagnostic tools that pierce through the PR.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
They allow us to track whether the billions of dollars flowing through the global economy are actually translating into fewer dead infants and more girls in classrooms over a 30-year timeline. They are the only way to prove a systemic failure.
That is a great way to reframe it. It is not reducing a human to a number. It is using numbers to defend humans against systemic neglect.
Exactly.
All right, decoder ring activated. Let's zoom out to the macro view. The global trajectory from 1990 to 2023. What is the story of our species over the last 3 decades?
Well, if you chart it out, the story begins in 1990 with the world sitting at a global HDI of roughly 0.60.
Okay, 0.60. What does that actually mean in real terms?
In the grand scheme of things, that is considered medium human development. It means that globally averaged out, humanity was surviving, but there was massive room for improvement.
So basic survival.
Right. Millions were still locked in extreme poverty, global life expectancy was significantly lower, and the digital revolution had not yet democratized information.
But from that baseline in 1990, the chart just takes off.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a relentless upward trending climb.
It really is.
Through the 90s, the 2000s, the 2010s, every year humanity gets a little better at keeping people alive, teaching them how to read, and growing the global economy. By 2019, we pushed up to 0.745.
It is the ultimate success story of human collaboration and technological advancement.
And then the music stops.
Yeah. The 2020 anomaly.
So what exactly happened in the data?
For the first time since the HDI was created, the line did not just flatten, it broke. Between 2020 and 2021, the global HDI dropped from 0.745 down to 0.742.
And I know that sounds incredibly small to the ear, a drop of 0.003 of a point.
Right, sounds tiny.
But in the context of global population-wide indices, how big of an earthquake is that?
It is catastrophic. You have to remember how much inertia is built into a global average of 8 billion people.
Right, it takes a lot to move the needle.
Exactly. To move that number backward means an unfathomable amount of collective trauma occurred simultaneously.
We are talking about the global health crisis, obviously.
Yes. But it was not just the direct loss of life, which was tragic enough. It was the multidimensional cascading failures.
What do you mean by cascading failures?
Well, it was the fact that schools in almost every country on Earth shuttered their doors, meaning millions of children lost a year or two of expected schooling.
Right, the education gear just stopped turning.
And it was supply chains grinding to a halt, plunging millions of vulnerable workers from the formal economy back into extreme poverty. The HDI dropped because our health, our wealth, and our knowledge generation all took a simultaneous hit.
It is a deeply unsettling reminder of our biological fragility. We can build artificial intelligence, we can put rovers on Mars, but a microscopic virus can still wipe out years of human development in a matter of months.
It absolutely can. However, the data reveals a second, equally important truth about humanity. The story did not end in 2021.
Right, the bounce back.
And what a ferocious bounce back it was. By 2023, the global HDI did not just recover to its pre-pandemic levels.
It surged past them.
Yes, to hit that historic all-time high of 0.756.
That is legitimately awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
We took the hardest collective hit in a generation. Our systems fractured, but within 2 years, the underlying engines of human progress kicked back into overdrive.
Our medical research, our educational resilience, our economic adaptability.
Yeah, we rebuilt the losses and then some.
The overarching system is incredibly resilient. But, and this is the crucial transition to the core of our deep dive, that resilience is not distributed equally.
Ah, here's the catch.
Right. A global average bounce back does not mean every country bounced back. And it certainly does not mean every country is playing the same game.
Which brings us down from the 30,000-foot view straight to the ground. We're going to look at Djibouti.
Yes.
Because if the world is a rising tide, we need to look at one specific boat to see how it is navigating the waves.
Djibouti is the perfect case study for this because, at first glance, its numbers tell a story of absolute, unmitigated triumph.
Okay.
It is a masterclass in why you cannot just look at percentage growth in a vacuum.
Well, let me lay out the raw stats from the source material.
Yeah.
In 1995, Djibouti's HDI was sitting at an incredibly low 0.31.
Very low.
By 2023, that number had surged to 0.513. If we were just doing the basic math, that is a massive 61.3% increase in their human development score.
A 61% jump is astronomical.
Right. I mean, if a company's stock went up 61%, the CEO would be on the cover of magazines. It implies a total transformation of the country.
And we absolutely must acknowledge the human reality behind that 61%. It is a triumph.
For sure.
Going from 0.31 to 0.513 means hundreds of thousands of lives literally saved by basic interventions. It means the construction of physical school buildings where there were none. It means clean water access.
The effort required to move that needle is monumental.
It really is.
But there's a massive but hiding in the global rankings.
There is. Because even after improving by 61% over nearly 3 decades, in 2023, Djibouti ranked 185th out of 203 ranked countries and regions.
Wait, 185th out of 203.
Yes.
They ran a 30-year marathon at a dead sprint, improved by over 60%, and they are still sitting in the bottom 10% of the planet. How does that happen?
This is a classic example of what economists call the base effect.
The base effect. Oh,
When a nation starts from a baseline approaching zero, very little modern infrastructure, extremely low life expectancy, massive illiteracy, any initial investment yields an exponential statistical return.
can you give me a tangible example of what the base effect looks like on the ground? I want to make sure I am grasping this.
Absolutely. Imagine a vast rural region with no paved roads and no modern medical facilities. If someone gets severely injured, it takes a 2-day journey on a dirt path to reach a doctor. Mortality is high.
Right. Sounds incredibly tough.
Now the government borrows money and builds one single 2-lane paved road connecting that region to the capital and opens one basic medical clinic. The health outcomes for that entire region will spike dramatically overnight. The percentage growth looks like a vertical line.
Because you went from zero access to some access, it is basically an infinite improvement.
Precisely. But here is the trap. Once you have built that first road and that first clinic, the EV exponential gains are over.
I see where this is going.
To get from a 0.513 HDI to a 0.70 HDI, to move from rank 185 into the top 100, you cannot just build a second road.
Right, the returns start diminishing.
Exactly. You have to fundamentally rewire the biology of the nation's economy. You have to move from basic literacy to advanced technical skills. You have to develop robust legal institutions, property rights, and a sophisticated formal labor market.
It is like the difference between learning how to jog a single mile and training to qualify for the Olympic marathon.
Oh, that is a great analogy.
Right. Getting off the couch and jogging a mile is a massive 100% improvement in your fitness. But that same training routine will not get you to the Olympics. You have to completely change your diet, your cellular metabolism, your psychology.
That is a phenomenal way to frame it. And to understand exactly why Djibouti is struggling to make that Olympic leap, why they are hitting that invisible ceiling at rank 185, we have to pull the HDI apart and look at the internal gears.
So where do we start?
The most revealing place to start is the knowledge threshold.
Okay, the education data in this report is genuinely staggering. Let's look at the baseline metric, expected years of schooling.
Right?
This measures what a child entering the education system today can anticipate receiving. Globally, the average is 13.04 years.
Which gets a child through primary school, high school, and maybe a year of university or vocational training.
Exactly. But in Djibouti, that number drops to 6.21 years.
It is literally cut in half. A child in Djibouti, on average, can only expect to finish primary school.
But that is the expected schooling for a child today. When we look at the actual adult population currently driving the economy, the numbers get much darker.
Yeah, this is where we look at the mean years of schooling.
And this is where we have to apply the gender filter, because the national average is hiding a chasm.
The sources provide a highly detailed breakdown of education by gender for 2023. Let's look at the men first.
Okay, the mean years of schooling for adult males in Djibouti is 5.085 years.
Which is objectively low. 5 years means the average adult male dropped out around the 5th grade.
Right.
He possesses basic literacy and numeracy, but likely lacks the advanced training required for a highly technical modern job.
But then we look at the female population.
Right.
The mean years of schooling for women in Djibouti is 2.722 years.
2.7 years. We really need to pause and truly let the weight of that number sink in.
That means the average woman in this nation has barely completed the 2nd or 3rd grade.
If you run the comparative math, women in Djibouti are receiving barely 53.5% of the education that men receive. It is nearly half.
Help me understand the mechanism here. We hear 2.7 years, and it sounds bad on paper. But what does a 2.7-year education actually mean for a human being trying to survive in the 21st century?
It dictates the entire trajectory of your existence.
Like, what happens when your formal learning stops at age 8?
At 2.7 years of schooling, you have rudimentary reading skills. You can perhaps read a street sign or the label on a product. You have basic addition and subtraction.
Okay.
But you do not have fractions. You do not understand compound interest. You cannot read a complex legal contract. You do not have the civics education to understand your rights under the law.
You are fundamentally locked out of the modern architecture of society.
Absolutely. In the global economy today, knowledge is the sole engine of wealth generation.
Yeah.
You cannot build a domestic tech sector, you cannot staff a modern healthcare system, and you cannot build advanced logistics infrastructure without an educated populace.
And by culturally or systemically limiting women to a third-grade education, Djibouti is intentionally running its national economic engine on half its cylinders.
Exactly. It is mathematically impossible to climb the global ranks from 185 to 100 when half of your entire human capital is systematically barred from secondary and higher education.
It would be like trying to win an Olympic rowing race where half the crew isn't allowed to put their oars in the water.
And the tragedy is that this educational deficit acts as a domino effect. It crashes violently into the other two pillars of human development.
Health and wealth.
Yes.
Let's follow those dominoes. Let's start with health. We have some wild temporal data here. We can actually use the numbers to time travel.
Life expectancy is one of the most reliable indicators of a society's baseline stability.
Okay.
Globally, we saw life expectancy jump from 65.1 years back in 1990 up to 73.38 years in 2023.
That is over 8 years of extra life handed to the average human on Earth, which is incredible.
It is.
Now, let's look at Djibouti. In 1990, their life expectancy was 55.4 years. By 2023, it climbed to 65.98 years.
Which locally is a massive triumph. A 10.5-year increase.
Yeah, that's huge.
That represents countless infants surviving early childhood diseases, better sanitation, and the rollout of basic vaccines. We cannot discount the human joy contained in those 10 extra years.
I completely agree. But the comparative data creates a very stark realization. Djibouti's life expectancy in 2023 is roughly 66 years.
Right.
The global average life expectancy in 1990 was 65.1 years.
Statistically speaking, being born in Djibouti today is like being born into the global average of the year 1990.
It is a 33-year developmental time lag. To put that in perspective, 1990 was before the widespread use of the commercial internet.
Exactly.
It was before modern antiretroviral therapies, before the mapping of the human genome. A person in Djibouti today has the health prospects of a global citizen from a generation and a half ago.
And while the health data operates on a 33-year time lag, the wealth data operates like it is on a completely different planet.
Let's cross over into the economic gulf. The metric we are using from the sources is gross national income, or GNI per capita.
For clarity, GNI per capita measures the total economic output of a country plus net income from abroad divided by its population.
Got it.
It is also adjusted for purchasing power parity, so a dollar represents the same amount of actual buying power in different countries.
Okay, so in 2023, the global average GNI per capita is $20,327.
And in Djibouti,
Djibouti sits at $6,367.
which means their economic output per person is roughly 31% of the global average.
It is a massive gap.
Uh-huh.
But as we established with the funnel analogy, we cannot just look at the national average.
Mhm.
A national average of $6,367 is hiding the internal reality.
Right.
We have to apply the gender filter to the money,
Mm-hmm.
just like we did to the education.
When you split that $6,367 down gender lines, the illusion of a unified national economy shatters entirely.
I have the gender breakdown here. In 2023, the GNI for men in Djibouti is $9,690. So it is about half the global average, but it is approaching $10,000.
Right.
The GNI for women, however, is an agonizing $3,101.
Let the math on that echo for a second. Men in this country have more than 3 times the economic power of women.
Wow.
It is a 3.12x multiplier.
It is an absolute economic chasm. But it makes terrifying logical sense when you connect it back to the education data.
It is a direct causal chain. When a society caps a woman's education at 2.7 years, they are actively legislating her future economic autonomy out of existence.
Yeah, how does a woman with a third-grade education secure a high-paying job in the formal economy?
She doesn't.
Walk me through the mechanism of that. What does her economic life actually look like?
Because she lacks the certifications for formal employment, she cannot be an accountant, a nurse, a logistics manager at the port. She is relegated to the informal economy.
To find the informal economy for us.
The informal economy is the shadow market. It is unregulated, untaxed, and completely unprotected by the state.
So what kind of jobs are we talking about?
It looks like street vending, domestic labor, or small-scale subsistence agriculture. If you are a woman selling produce in an informal market, you have no legal minimum wage. You have no safety regulations.
Right.
If a supplier shorts you, you cannot take them to court because you cannot read the legal paperwork to file a claim, and your business technically does not exist on paper.
You are completely invisible to the financial system.
Exactly. You cannot walk into a bank and get a business loan to expand your fruit stand into a grocery store because you have no formal credit history and no collateral the bank recognizes.
That is brutal.
Your wealth is likely stored in physical assets, maybe livestock or jewelry, which are incredibly vulnerable to theft, disease, or drought.
So a 2.7-year education guarantees a life trapped in the informal economy, earning $3,100 a year, which guarantees you will never accumulate the capital needed to send your own daughter to secondary school. The cycle locks itself in place.
And the source material highlights this systemic blockade perfectly when we look at the Gender Inequality Index, or GII, rankings.
Oh, I was looking at this data point. It is wild.
The Chinese analysis of the data.
The global average for women in parliament is 26.5%. They're basically matching the global average for female political representation at the very highest levels of government.
They are. But now look at the economic side of that same empowerment metric. Look at the female labor force participation rate.
Globally, female labor participation is around 46.5%.
Yeah.
In Djibouti, it is 19.0%.
Exactly. Let the contradiction wash over you.
That is bizarre. They have women sitting in parliament making national laws at the exact same rate as the rest of the world, but only 19% of women are actually participating in the formal labor force. How is that even possible?
It reveals a society that is deeply structurally bifurcated. It suggests that political representation has been achieved for a very specific, highly educated elite tier of women. Those women have breached the ceiling, they are in the halls of power, but their presence in parliament has not trickled down to dismantle the structural barriers facing the everyday woman.
Right. The woman with 2.7 years of schooling isn't helped by a female parliamentarian if the state isn't building secondary schools in her district or providing pathways into the formal economy.
It is the illusion of equality. Having a few women at the top makes the national dashboard look progressive, but it hides the fact that 81% of the female population is economically sidelined.
Which brings us precisely to the mechanism designed to expose these exact illusions, the inequality-adjusted HDI, or the IHDI.
Yes. Let's go back to our funnel visual from the very beginning.
Okay, we established that globally, if you pour the world's progress into the funnel, we lose 21.96% of it to the inequality filter. The global gains are hoarded by the global north or by the ultra-wealthy.
Right.
But what happens when we pour Djibouti's 0.513 HDI score into their own internal funnel?
The loss is absolute devastation. When you adjust Djibouti's reported progress for its internal inequality, their score shrinks by an agonizing 33.53%.
A third of their progress just vanishes.
Over a third of their national human development is effectively erased from the record because it is distributed so unequally.
I want to make sure I truly understand the philosophy of this penalty. Let me try an analogy.
Go for it.
Imagine Djibouti borrows $50 million from the World Bank. They use that money to build a gleaming, state-of-the-art glass and steel hospital right in the center of the capital city.
Okay.
It has MRI machines, top-tier surgeons, the works. On paper, the nation's total wealth has increased by $50 million. And statistically, their national health metrics might tick upward because the people using that hospital are living longer.
Correct. The baseline HDI would register that as national growth.
But what if the reality on the ground is that only the wealthiest 5% of the population, mostly educated males who work in the formal economy, can actually afford the fees to walk through the doors of that hospital?
No.
What if the woman with the 2.7-year education, who is surviving on $3,000 a year in the informal market, is still giving birth at home and facing a maternal mortality rate of 234 per 100,000. Does that hospital actually count as human development?
The IHDI explicitly and mathematically says no. It does not count. Or rather, it only counts for a fraction of what it claims to.
Wow.
You cannot claim national progress when the gains are walled off and hoarded by a select demographic. And the source data gives us the exact anatomy of Djibouti's 33.53% penalty. Do you want to guess what the single largest driver of that massive loss is?
Based on everything we've talked about, it has to be the education gap.
Yes. The report notes that education inequality alone accounts for nearly 45% of their total IHDI loss.
Almost half the penalty is driven by the fact that they aren't keeping girls in the classroom.
It is the anchor dragging their entire society down. It isn't just a lack of hospitals, and it isn't just a lack of deep-water ports. The single biggest reason they are trapped at rank 185 is the systematic exclusion of half their population from the knowledge economy. The math is utterly merciless. You can build all the infrastructure you want, but you cannot hide structural inequality from the IHDI.
It is incredibly heavy. As a listener sitting here processing this, you might be feeling like the story for developing nations is entirely grim.
It can feel that way, yes.
They are decades behind in health, operating on a fraction of the wealth, structurally hobbling their own women, and getting heavily penalized by the UN for their inequality. It feels like a story of perpetual failure.
But this is where the source material introduces a massive paradigm-shifting twist.
The planetary pressures adjusted HDI, the PHDI.
Exactly. The PHDI completely flips the script on what we consider success and forces the global north to look in the mirror.
Let's lay out the environmental data, because this is where the triumph of the wealthy nations suddenly looks like a crisis. To achieve that beautiful, record-high global average HDI of 0.756, there was a planetary cost. Globally, the average person emits 4.54 tons of CO2 every single year, and they have a material footprint of 12.71 tons per year.
We need to define material footprint because it is a very visceral metric. It measures the actual physical mass of the Earth that is extracted, mined, logged, and consumed to sustain a person's lifestyle.
So we are talking about the lithium mined for our smartphones, the sand dredged from riverbeds to make concrete for our highways, the forests cleared to raise the beef we eat, the oil pumped to fuel the planes we fly in.
Yes, the global north has built its incredible health and wealth by literally devouring 12.7 tons of the planet per person, per year, and coughing up 4.5 tons of carbon in the process.
Now let's look at Djibouti, because they are not highly industrialized, because they do not have millions of citizens commuting in SUVs or running central air conditioning 24/7. Their ecological footprint is radically
Extremely different.
The average person in Djibouti emits just 0.43 tons of CO2.
That is less than 1/10 of the global average.
And their material footprint is 11.03 tons, which is also below the global average. Because they are living so lightly on the Earth, when the UN adjusts the global rankings to penalize countries for environmental damage, Djibouti's ranking defies gravity.
In the PHDI, Djibouti ranks 154th out of 166 measured countries.
Wait, their regular HDI rank is 185. But when you factor in the planet, they jump to 154. That is a massive leap of 31 places.
It is the paradox of modern progress. Djibouti causes far less environmental damage than almost any country in the global north. They are living much closer to the boundaries of what the Earth's biosphere can actually sustain over the long term.
This raises what might be the most important philosophical question of this entire deep dive.
Go ahead.
We have spent this whole time looking at Djibouti as a country that is behind, a country that desperately needs to catch up to the global average. But if achieving a high HDI means every single one of the 8 billion citizens on Earth has to start burning 4.5 tons of carbon a year and extracting 13 tons of Earth, the planet will literally boil. Is the global north's version of progress actually just a suicide pact for the human race?
It is the existential question of 21st century economics. The PHDI was created precisely to force wealthy nations to confront this reality.
We cannot, with a straight face, tell developing nations in Africa or Southeast Asia to emulate the 20th century growth model of the United States or Europe.
Exactly. The biosphere cannot support 200 carbon-heavy, highly industrialized, hyper-consuming nations.
So what is the path forward for a country like Djibouti? They can't stay at a 2.7-year female education level, but they also can't become a massive carbon emitter.
The challenge for the developing world is no longer to follow the path of the global north. The challenge is to leapfrog it entirely.
Leapfrog it how?
They have to find a way to invent a new architecture of development. How do you increase female schooling to 12 years? And how do you raise the GNI from 6,000 to 20,000 using renewable energy, circular economies, and sustainable agriculture?
How do you increase human capability without increasing the planetary burn rate?
Exactly. They basically have to invent the future because the past model is broken.
Okay, we have covered an immense expanse of territory today. We've gone from the theoretical origins of global indices in the 1990s down to the granular reality of third-grade dropouts in the informal economy of East Africa, all the way out to the atmospheric physics of global carbon footprints.
It is a lot to process.
Let's pull all of these moving parts together.
The Chinese comparative analysis actually provides a perfect summary matrix for 2023. Let's build the ultimate scorecard for Djibouti to synthesize everything we have learned.
I'll lay out the final matrix.
Yeah.
In the base HDI, the overall GPA of progress, Djibouti is ranked 185 out of 203. In the GDI, which measures the gender outcome gap, they are 186 out of 194. In the GI, which measures systemic gender inequality like maternal mortality and labor participation, they are 128 out of 182.
And finally, in the PHDI, the planetary scorecard, they jump up to 154 out of 166.
So what does this matrix tell us?
Looking at that matrix, we can synthesize the core logic of this massive multidimensional report into three distinct, undeniable takeaways.
Okay, hit me with number one.
Number one, growth is significant, but the base is thin. We cannot deny the incredible human achievement of a 61.3% HDI increase since 1995. But because they started from such a low baseline, they are still sprinting from the very back of the global pack.
Makes sense. Number two, inequality is the ultimate roadblock.
Losing over a third of your entire national progress to the IHDI penalty is an unsustainable tax on a society.
Yeah, 33.53% is just too much to lose.
Exactly. You cannot build a stable, modern nation when the gains in wealth and health are sequestered at the top while the bottom of the pyramid is left to survive in the informal shadow economy.
And number three, the most glaring, urgent point of all. The gender gap is the necessary breakthrough.
The data proves it with mathematical certainty. You cannot fix the national economic output, you cannot fix the maternal health outcomes, and you cannot stop the massive inequality penalty without first fixing the 2.7-year education limit placed on women.
Right.
Empowering the female half of the population is not just a Western moral imperative, according to the cold, hard data. It is the fundamental structural prerequisite for moving up the global ranks. You must let both halves of the crew row the boat.
I want to pause here for a moment and be incredibly clear with you, our listener. Whenever a deep dive starts discussing national policies, gender disparities, or wealth distribution, it can very quickly sound like the hosts are preaching a specific ideology or pushing a political agenda.
That is definitely not the goal here.
Right. We want to state unequivocally that our goal today is not to endorse any specific foreign intervention, dictate local cultural norms, or take a political side.
Our role is simply to read the instruments. The UN data scientists and the analysts who compile these reports aren't passing moral judgments. They're simply running the math on human capital.
Yeah.
The numbers are just a mirror reflecting the structural realities of how societies choose to organize themselves and what the biological and economic consequences of those choices are.
The math doesn't care about our politics. It just measures the outcomes. And that brings us to the end of our journey today. If there is one overarching truth we can extract from this deep dive, it is that true human development isn't just a stacking of GDP dollars.
No, it is not.
It isn't a race to extract the most material from the earth. It is fundamentally about expanding capability. It is about whether every single citizen, regardless of their gender or the zip code they were born in, has an equal chance to embrace the possibilities of the future.
It is about removing the invisible ceiling so everyone can climb.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over as you go about your week. Throughout this hour, we have looked at massive global averages, and we have analyzed the national rankings of a country thousands of miles away. But bring it home.
Yeah, look at your own surrounding.
Think about your own city, your own town, your own neighborhood. We all see the average wealth reported on the local news. We love to celebrate the high water marks of our communities.
But the average hides the reality.
Exactly. But if you took the tools we learned today, if you took that inequality-adjusted filter and applied it to your own city block right now, whose progress is being erased from the final score, who is quietly paying the hidden tax for your community's average success. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.